So thrilled that we have Amanda Pinto Regan here for you today. She has spent nearly 20 years helping people tell stories that actually move others to action. She's led communications for big nonprofits, including a campaign that brought $150 million more into Connecticut's education budget. And she started her career as a journalist with bylines in places like the Boston Globe. So she knows how to get people's attention and tell really effective, compelling stories that inspire folks to take action. And these days, she's all about helping leaders like you share your message with clarity, confidence, and real impact. So I am thrilled to invite to the Thrive Summit for her first appearance, the one and only Amanda Pinto Regan. I will turn it over to you.
Hi, everyone. Can you give me a quick thumbs up if you can hear me? Okay, great. My communications expertise exceeds my technological expertise by like a significant margin. So I'm glad you can all hear me. I'm really excited to talk about this topic. Storytelling is one of my favorite things, and it is something that I have found throughout my career that business leaders, women business leaders in particular, are sometimes hesitant to lean on. And I want to help unstick that because I think it is such a valuable tool in communicating who we are, what we can do for others, why it matters, and helping serve our bigger goals. So that's the question, who, right? Whenever you're crafting a story, the question is who is the story about and who is the story for? And I think there's a couple reasons. I usually do this for nonprofit leaders. A few of you, hello friends, have been to some of my nonprofit storytelling webinars. So some of this will sound familiar, some of it will sound new. But for nonprofit storytelling, and I think similar for this group, one of the reasons that can hold folks back from telling stories is the client or the end user, the person that you're serving. A lot of us are in service-based industries or service-based organizations, and you want to be able to tell a story that doesn't objectify, that doesn't that helps the person that you're telling the story about like maintain their story and their dignity, and doesn't make us feel icky like this is a story about how great I am, right? So that's one block. The second is telling stories about people can sound like a luxury. It can sound like a funny, like fun, whimsical, nice to have. And what I hope I can convince you is that it's actually central to making who you are and what you do sticky and memorable. And I think there's stories that you already have. So who am I? As Olivia shared, my name is Amanda Pinto Regan. I'm the founder of Iron String Communications. I primarily work with nonprofit leaders and mission-driven leaders on their strategic communications work, which is everything from core messaging development to storytelling to I ghostwrite for some executives. Everybody needs help telling their stories, and that's what we're going to work on a little bit today. And yes, so what we do, this is a photo of an event I did at a community foundation here in New Haven. I'm based in Connecticut. And this was with 30 nonprofit leaders, all of whom were working on how to get how to get their stories better out into the public and how to help people understand what they do in ways that would make them motivated to give or partner. So that's what I'm here to do, to help your communications become stronger and more connected by giving you the tools and strategies to maximize your impact. So because I worked in an education organization for one decade, felt like 2 decades sometimes. It was very time full of learning for me, but for 10 years, I like to start with a do now. So we're going to take 2 minutes, and if you could jot down when you think about what you do for work, what is an example or a story that first comes to mind? Don't give me your elevator pitch. What's a story that illustrates what you do? Just take a few minutes to write that down.
I can volunteer, although like naming when you were talking about like feeling sort of like icky, it feels like sharing this story feels like bragging, which I don't love.
I'd love to unpack that one, but let's hear it.
Yeah. We can skip past that for now. I did a one-on-one goal setting call with a PhD candidate who was feeling overwhelmed about finishing her program because like federal funding was potentially going away. She has a little kid who's I think like 2 years old. She has a husband who's also in grad school, and she was like, this program isn't very structured and I feel like I could be like trapped in it for a long time, or it might completely go away, and I just feel like this sense of like not having control over this like huge thing that I've been working toward for so long. And we talked for an hour. I like asked her a bunch of questions. We like nerded out about goals. Fortunately, she also loves goals. I love goals. Like that's my thing. I learned about her PhD program because I am not in, like, I've never been in a PhD program. And at the end of an hour, she had like a timeline, she had next steps, she had like the beginnings of like an email drafted to her advisor, like, and she felt so much better about where she was going. And like, I don't know, just like more confident that she could accomplish this thing that she'd been working toward for a really long time.
Thank you for sharing that. Can I just get, I want to try something really quick. Can you give us a thumbs up if that story did not sound like bragging to you? If that story didn't sound like bragging, can we get a thumbs up? I'm seeing some thumbs up. So Brittany, I think one of the things that you did in that story that was so masterful is I mean, one of the first things you did was credential the client, right? This is a PhD candidate. And then you told us about their background. What's the challenges that they're experiencing in their life? Bragging would have sounded more like, I am this awesome like organization and this person came to me and here's this wisdom that I dispensed. You didn't do that. You credentialed the person you're helping. You centered what their experience is. And then now I, as a listener, I've also never been in a PhD program, but I'm invested in this person's journey and what that must be like and what they might need to overcome. And I'm curious about how you have helped them. And I think you lay that out very nicely in that story. So we'll come back to that. But that was a really helpful story to get us started. So thank you. Okay, what does your story say about you, right? So Brittany's story tells us, yeah, I have a little bit inside insight about Brittany. However, I will say that Brittany's story is about demystifying the process. Like I'm going to help unstick you and give you clear goals that will help you navigate something that at first seems insurmountable. And I think that story about the PhD candidate is a great encapsulation of what that looks like in action. And that's what stories are. Stories are your mission in action. Stories are illustrating what you can do in a way that people will remember more than just buzzy ChatGPT generated lingo. Stories and authenticity are going to win the day. And that's what your story can do for you. So we are wired for story. This is a photo of a campfire. I recently went to a campfire with a bunch of Girl Scouts this summer. But for millennia, probably, we have been wired to gather around the fire and share stories. And so it's one of the reasons why stories are so memorable is because it's part of who we are. So someone, not me, coined the phrase that the shortest distance between two people is not a straight line, it's a single story. Story can help us understand, right? Like I don't know any PhD candidates, but now I know a little bit about one because of what Brittany just shared. So I think that story can help us explain who we are and unite us in ways that, pure fact sharing can't. So now I wanted to talk to you about one particular story. So this is the movie Black Panther. The great irony of this is that I am not a superhero. I believe this is Marvel. Don't come. Oh, it even says Marvel. Okay, I know people come for me when I get the whatever uniting force wrong, but I am not a superhero movie person, but I am married to one. And I also have a child who plans to be Black Panther for Halloween, although he's not seen this movie because he's 6. But I don't love superhero movies, but I do love this one. And for me, the reason is that this feels like such a rich, specific, interesting story with relatable characters, with like themes that are important. And it just felt fresh and new and like something I hadn't seen before. And it follows the hero's journey, which is a pattern of storytelling that was first identified in 1949 by Joseph Campbell, right? Like, so you have a hero, there's a call to adventure, something supernatural happens, there's a big challenge, they go into an abyss, they atone, they return, right? That's the journey of the main character in the Black Panther. So how is it that a movie made fairly recently, I have lost my ability to measure time, but within the last 5 or so years, how does that feel fresh and new and exciting when it is following a pattern that has been existent for decades? And the reason is that the characters, the individual story, it was what makes it fresh and unique and memorable. And the structure is what makes it palatable and interesting. We're wired to understand that structure because that structure has been around since long before 1949. So all of this is to say, you do not need to reinvent the wheel every time you tell a story about what your business is or illustrating who you are and your value add. You can use structures, some of which we're going to go through today, that have long been in existence, but will feel fresh because people are the special sauce. What you do and what you uniquely bring is going to make that structure feel as if it is something brand new, at the same time having that familiarity that gives it memorability to people. So if you were in nonprofits in the last, I don't know, 15 years, someone probably told you about the Pixar story. This was like a very big thing. I think I had to read a book about it at one point. And for good reason, right? Like, so Pixar had a lot of great movies. I think the biggest one is Toy Story, at least from my dated reference, it was for a time. And Pixar storytelling follows a very specific format. Once upon a time, there was blank, every day blank, then one day blank because of that blank, until finally blank. And I think that structure lends itself really well to service-based entrepreneurs because we are all geared to solve a problem. And so this structure is something has always happened, then one day this thing happened to change it, here's the problem, and then finally here's the solution. So it's a useful framework for us to think about when we're crafting our own stories. Show don't tell sounds simpler than it is. But it is one of the things. I studied journalism in college, and I think this was probably our entire journalism 101 class could have been called Show Don't Tell. Because somewhere along the way, we all learned that telling is simpler, that people just want you to just tell me what the thing is, which, right, sometimes you need to do. If you're submitting a grant, there's got to be data. There has to be direct lines explaining what you do. But most people would rather listen to a story than listen to information. It's why fiction is usually more popular than nonfiction, or why some of the best nonfiction is storytelling based. Because of those slides earlier, right, of us all around the fire, when you're showing someone something, it is more memorable and it also feels more authentic. Like, I can tell you something, I can give you some facts, right? Those, to Brittany's point, might seem a little more braggy. If I say, I have, the first thing I tell you about my goal setting business is that I have 100% customer satisfaction. That may be true, but it doesn't inspire as much confidence as it's a little bit counterintuitive, right? 100% customer satisfaction. I want that business. But when you lead with a story, people can feel what the experience of working with you is like more. There's a place for the facts, there's a place for the supporting evidence, but when you show, don't tell, you get an authentic connection that you can't achieve with facts alone. So this is one of my, if you know me, you've probably seen this slide at some point because I just love it so much. I am a dog owner, and at one point I did a presentation at a conference about this show, don't tell. And I found this ad, which is vintage. Wasn't trying to insult anyone's current ad campaigns, but this is for a dog food that has all this great stuff, right? It's fortified with liver. Dogs know it, dogs show it, right? So the point of this ad is to tell you that, like, this food is good for your dog because here's this ingredient it has. Apparently liver is good for dogs, or at least it was perceived to be at some point. That's one example of an ad. I would argue this is, although there's some showing, this is mostly telling. I'm telling you this is fortified with liver. That's what you need to know. You need to know its ingredient. Then you've got Iams. IMS did an ad campaign called Keep Love Strong. And it was about service members returning home from deployment and hugging their dogs. This is a video, which is why the image is a little bit grainy. But this one gets you. Like this, I have no idea what's in IAM's dog food. I don't know if the claim that it keeps love strong is true. That seems like I couldn't write a SMART goal around that. But what I do know is that it makes me feel something, and that I understand that IAMS gets that there's a connection between the person and how much they love their animal, and that they're creating a food to strengthen and grow that bond. So that presentation that I gave at the conference, this is the only slide. These are the only two slides that I remember from it because of the story. So the idea that story is a memorable force for you to explain who you are and what you do, I think is really well illustrated by my friends at IAMS. I don't use IAMS dog food. I'm not being paid for this endorsement. The other important thing to note that also seems counterintuitive is the specific is universal. So sometimes when I have encountered folks that are hesitant to tell certain specific stories because, all right, Brittany, I'm going to go back to you because I love your example. Maybe most of Brittany's clients aren't PhD candidates. So she's like, well, if I tell this story, people are going to think that I only work with, the most degreed people out there, and then I'm going to like lose out on other businesses. The inverse is actually true, is that even though I have never been a PhD candidate, the way Brittany told that story made me relate to that person and made me think about similarities in my own life and how I might benefit from similar services. So the more specific you can get, actually the more universal the story is because it feels real. When you try to give a more general story that appeals to everyone, it almost appeals to no one because you rob it of all of its authentic details that make it rich and sticky. That's the Black Panther part, right? Like we just gave you the skeleton of the hero's journey. You're like, okay, yeah, fine. But you don't remember the specific details because there aren't any. You need the specific to make it universal. So my somewhat dated but beloved reference here is Field of Dreams, right? I hope many of you have seen this. It's from 1989. I highly recommend. But in any case, right, I have never played a game of baseball in my life. I have never been to the state of Iowa. There's a whole lot of supernatural stuff that happens in this movie that's also never happened to me. But it has been my favorite movie since the day I saw it when I was a kid because I know what it's like to lose someone. I know what it's like to be like nostalgic and to have big dreams that you can't quite understand. I don't need to be a farmer in Iowa to understand any of that. And I didn't need this movie to be about a little girl in Connecticut, right? So there is a universality to that story that resonated with a whole lot of people, even though the specific details of that story are probably experienced by no one that we know in real life. Feeling is winning. So this is why show don't tell is one of the guiding principles here, is because when you make someone feel something, that's the IAMS commercial, right? If I can get you to feel something, your story is more memorable. And so my great example of this from this year, I sometimes read YA. Every time I do this presentation, I think about how I tell on all of my, media consumption choices, but that is what it is. Sometimes I read YA, and a YA book that I read this year is The Sun is Also a Star. And I thought that this book, so basically this book is about two immigrants, young people in their maybe early 20s or teenagers. And it's a very specific story about these two young people and what they're going through. And you feel for them, and you may have your own thoughts going in about what the immigrant experience is like in America, or what you think about people's visas or general immigration policy. This book is not explaining to you really anything about that. It's just telling you what's happening to these two people, and it makes you feel something for them, for their journeys, for their relationships. And you are going to, I retained more about what it must be like to be a child of immigrants in this country from this book than I have from probably like 20 news articles, because it made me feel something. And so that's why when you're telling a story, when you bring that authenticity, when you bring that the realness to it, it resonates in a way that the facts alone can't. Every story serves a purpose. So I remember the first time I said this in a presentation. I got some pushback lovingly from a participant who was like, that feels so icky, you know? Like, what if I just want to tell a story because I like telling stories and I don't have some nefarious embedded reason to try to get you to do something? That's not what I mean at all. I'm not, this isn't like pro trickery. But what I'm saying is every time you tell a story, whether acknowledged or not, there's a purpose, right? So if I tell you a story about, you know, I went to go see a play this weekend. Maybe I want you to know that I really like theater. And like maybe I want you to go with me sometime. Or maybe I want you to know that like I'm into culture and like you should talk about that kind of stuff with me. There's always a reason to sharing a story beyond pure entertainment. And so I think about it right as Russian dolls. So the smallest Russian doll here is Brittany's goal setting business. The biggest Russian doll is the PhD candidate who needs assistance, right? And then there's layers of story in between. If you lead with the smallest Russian doll, you alienate people, right? So if you lead with like, here is the smallest nugget about what my value add is, you've taken the story out of it. Now we're going to telling and not showing. But if you lead with the story and the embedded little tiny Russian doll is what you do, and you do it in an authentic way that isn't grafted on, but it is just like part of the story that you're trying to communicate authentically, that's where you're winning. And you already have the stories. We're going to do some work on that together now, but this is not as hard as people think it is. Because if you know people, if you do work, there are stories that illustrate that are already exciting and enveloping. It's just a matter of finding them. So every story contains 1 to 3 key points that underscore the message and control the communications funnel. So what I tell people about this is if I tell you a long rambling 15-minute story, right? You get to extract out of that what you think are the most important things. I don't have control anymore because I just gave you everything under the sun, and like maybe what you think is most important is not what I think is most important. Whereas when you tell a story and there are 1 to 3 key points, you're limiting what goes into that communications funnel and thus limiting what the person that is consuming your content can extract. So when you think about here are the, if you were to take Brittany, I'm going to keep coming back to your great example. Thank you for sharing it. If you were to take Brittany's story and dissect it, what are the 1 to 3 points that she wants to communicate about her business? I think you'd see them reflected back. Like I don't pretend to know what exactly those 3 points are, but I would venture to guess there. If you don't know where to, you're working with people who might not know where to start. They know where they want to go. They don't know how to get there. There might be some overwhelm, right? And you help them figure out what it is they need to do and why, right? So it's like when you have the 1 to 3 points and illustrate them, you can craft a story from there and also limit what goes into the funnel so that the person remembers what you think is the most important about your business. And a story is a chance to leave your audience with something to think, something to feel, and something to believe about who you are and who you want to be. So there can be something aspirational as part of your story. You don't have to wait to start telling stories once you're 20 years deep in your organizational journey. Like you can tell people what you've done, you can tell people what you're doing, you can tell people what you're about to do. The key is that it is authentic and real, and people can feel that. And when they can feel that, they can believe that, and that can help drive them to action. So now we're going to start talking about building our back pocket story. So you're going to get that due now if you don't already have it handy, and we're going to do a little work together on some of this stuff. But what we mean by back pocket story is if you find yourself in a business setting or you find yourself at a extended family dinner, like what story are you telling about what you do? That will be memorable and that will, in that case, drive people to action, to partner or to refer you to someone else or to be inspired and motivated by what you do in such a way that they want to help you. So there's different ways that we can build the back pocket story, and what we're going to talk about in these next couple slides are structures like the hero's journey, but structures that lend itself well to promoting your businesses in ways that don't feel self-promotional or icky, or promoting yourself as a leader in ways that don't feel self-promotional or icky, but are instead memorable and resonant. So you're going to revisit your do now and first think about how would or wouldn't you change your positive example based on what you know now from the last couple slides. So we're going to let's just take 1 minute to just jot down what might you change or not change based on what you know now. All right, can we hear from one person one thing that you might change? A person who said that they might change their example based on what we know now. Does anyone want to just give us a quick soundbite? What's one thing that you might change? Yes, Leah.
So, my business is helping people who have suffered some sort of property loss, whether it's like from a hurricane or flood. And I've been working with Olivia a lot on this, to bring heart and soul into something that can seem so transactional. So when I first did your prompt, I was coming from the perspective of what do we do? Like we help people navigate a challenging time in their life and hopefully calm their fears and anxiety. And the reframe of that was, I haven't completely fleshed it out, but understanding that the reframe is more of what is that person in that situation feeling right now? So not necessarily like what we do, but how are you feeling? And so, um, you know, we deal a lot with like catastrophic losses. And so what is that person feeling? Right? Like they don't have a home to go back to. So on a very general level, like property loss is a challenging time. Life can be XYZ, or one can feel ABC. I haven't finished it out, but just understanding the telling of the story, not from what we offer or what we do, but rather what someone might be living through and experiencing and suffering in that moment, that is a result of a physical thing that's happened to them. But that heart space loss, right? There's a physical loss, but then there's a loss in here too. So trying to get to that.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, that's incredibly heavy. And I think it makes a lot of sense what you said, right? So it's like centering the person, their feelings, their experiences, and then what are you, how are you and your business helping them navigate this time, right? Like, so I've never, thankfully, like lost my home in a catastrophic event, but like all of us can put ourselves in those shoes, especially with the way that you're crafting that story, and understand how you and your organization is helping in that instance. And then the second question I would have you ask yourself when you think about revisiting that do now is, how do you know that what you do matters? So, right, in your case, it's super tangible. Like you can look at what this person's experiences are with, with housing in their life and how you've helped them navigate this difficult time. That, how do you know what you do matter should be embedded in that story, right? So like when Brittany tells it, it's this PhD candidate after an hour had clarity that they didn't have before, and then Brittany can update that story later and say, and now a year later, their business is thriving, or whatever the case may be, right? But like, how do you know what you do matters gets embedded in that story. And then what best illustrates your impact is sort of tangentially related to that, right? So it's like, how do you know what it do matter? How do you know what you do matters? And then what is the final outcome that illustrates, here's this thing that only Olivia can do, and now XYZ is possible for this person that's purchased her service, right? So it's those two things. How do you know what you do matters? What best illustrates your impact? Those should be embedded in the story that you're crafting. So here's some story structures that we're going to talk about. The first is the case study. Because of the work I do in X, Y is possible. So here's one example. These are all real examples, by the way, with just some little tweaks to not out clients. But here's one, right? So when I think about our work, I think about Frank. Frank came to our after school enrichment program, never played a single game of chess. He grew his passion and his skill. Today he goes to competitive high school where his chess prowess set him apart in his application. I get to work with dozens of kids like Frank. So if we were to dissect this paragraph, right, the first thing it does is it centers the end user. What this doesn't say is, hi, my name is Julie, and I run an after-school chess enrichment that transforms the lives of kids without access to after-school activities, right? Like that's a line. There's nothing wrong with that, but I would argue it's way less memorable than making it about Frank. Here's this kid. And then we tell you that Frank is not an exception. We tell you that Frank is actually just one example of the however many, I don't know how many kids that this person is working with. And it tells you something about this person, like the framing of I get to work with dozens of kids like Frank is not braggy to the concerns of earlier. It's not like savory. It is, hey, I get the opportunity to do this. It feels better. It feels less icky and less self-promotional and more about the end user. So I would argue that the case study, which all of you have, right? So like you have something that you have done in your career or in your businesses that has benefited the end user. Just think about, jot down some ideas that you can come back to later about the experience of that, like start with the experience of that end user and then see how you can weave in your impact on that person, right? So this doesn't explicitly say what they do in their after school enrichment program with chess, but you kind of get it. And I think that's okay. So it's like the idea of centering the client, the end user, is what makes that case study really sing. And I think this structure would work for a lot of us. Another one is the problem and the solution. So like this is how I uniquely meet a larger need in a way that other people can't. So this is one example. So I got into career coaching because during my 20 years in corporate, I saw so many moms with skills, passion, and big ideas struggle to get back into the workforce after having kids. Our system isn't set up to ease that transition, so we needed to set up our own system instead. So the story again is centering like not a specific, not one person, because this is problem and solution, but they're telling you, number one, I worked in corporate for 20 years, right? So you're credentialing yourself without bragging. You're saying, I saw so many moms that have this challenge, and I know that the world isn't set up to help them, and so I'm going to help them. So you're giving the problem and showing how you're the solution. Again, I would argue in a way that doesn't feel braggy or icky. You didn't say, I am the only career coach for working moms because I understand how it is, right? Like you're instead centering the problem, centering the service, not centering yourself in a way that makes this story-based and not braggy or icky, but helps you to advance your goals. Okay, this one, measuring impact, how I know I make a difference, right? So for a lot of people, I think this like measuring impact part can feel the most self-promotional, but I'm going to argue that it doesn't have to. So here's an example. So this is someone who offers art therapy in an area where there's no providers within 30 miles. I've had a son drive his mother across state lines to come to one of our sessions because of what it means to her in her recovery, and that's why I'll never stop doing this. So we get inherently in that story what this person is doing in art therapy is life-changing. But what it centers on is that there's no other provider. I'm doing something no one else around me is doing. So it's really a story about like deprivation and like social systems failing, right? Not about me and why I'm awesome, but about there's no one else providing this service. And people are crossing state lines to get it because there's such a need. And that's why I'll never stop doing this. Tells you I really care, right? Like, this isn't about a bottom line for me. This is a person that does this because they get why it's so important. So that how I know I make a difference story doesn't necessarily, it doesn't need to lead with, this would be a very different story if this person said, I'm the leading art therapy provider in Rhode Island. And people cross state lines to come to me because I'm so awesome, right? That feels very different than what this story is. And I also think that many of you have a story like this inside that you can pull out in a way that doesn't feel icky or self-promotional, but is memorable, authentic, and drives people to action. So we're almost to the Q&A. I have not been looking at the chat, but I think we're going to get into there in a second. If you need more, I would love to get to know some of you better, all of you better. Some of you already know. But I do have a newsletter on my website, a monthly newsletter. If you visit ironstringcomms.com, which I think the link will be in the chat if it's not already, You can sign up for the newsletter. I also do coaching sessions, monthly workshops. I have a strategic communications and storytelling cohort that is launching in October, actually late September. And I can also do a storytelling toolkit in a day package. There's lots of different ways that I work with folks just like you, who are navigating these challenges in different ways. And with that, I think I wanted to leave us 5 minutes.
Ooh, Brittany says, do you recommend starting with stories that feel important and finding a structure that fits them well, or the other way around?
Oh, this is a great question. My groan was just because like I was trained in journalism, so sometimes it's hard to separate those two things in my mind because the way my brain works, they're so entwined at this point. But I think it's a great question, and I think I would say I wouldn't this is such a cop out, but it doesn't I don't mean it to be. I think I would start with neither of those things. Like I would start with the idea. What's the idea I want to communicate? What's the communications funnel? What are the 1 to 3 things that I want to share? And then what story can I tell that encapsulates those 3 things? And I think the first thing the first thing is like, all right, what story? Okay, Frank. Yep, Frank. Here. And then I would think about everything I know about Frank and sort of write out a draft and then be like, this story doesn't have a structure. Which one of these structures would work best, right? So it's a little column A, column B, but I would start with the funnel, start with the what do you want to communicate, and then go from there. Ooh, I see another question. How can I tell a story on my website with photos, imagery, especially the hero image on the main page of biophotos? Ooh, okay. I am not a photo journalist or a digital media specialist. I did take some photojournalism classes in college, and I do have a website, so I'm going to try my hand at answering this one. So I think to the extent that you can center end users' stories in photos, I think that's really helpful. I think a hero image, right, that centers the end user experience is always helpful. I'd have to know more about like, I know you probably aren't going to I don't know exactly how your business works, but right, like I'm envisioning like people hugging in front of a new home being built or something that illustrates the journey. That may not be the perfect example. Sometimes if a photo doesn't work, a video can. So like a 45-second video of, it doesn't even have to be anybody's like that you can hear. It could just be different images or different video clips of like how it's like just showing your work in action, I think. I know stock photography is sometimes necessary, but whenever you can use authentic photography, I think that tells its own story. Like these are real people that make up this thing. I would go for less than perfect reality over stock photo purity any day.
1,000% echo that, right? Especially it's the same as we see with like ChatGPT, right? Great tool. I use it all the time for like idea generation and whatnot, but I can spot a ChatGPT Instagram caption or newsletter from a mile away, and so can all of our users. So the more, I think this is going to become increasingly vital in the coming months and years, the more it can be genuine. Yeah, Brittany, specific being universal. So the more it can be your footage, even if it's worse quality, it's genuine, it's yours, and it can foster that connection. If we don't have any other questions, I'm going to ask us I would love to hear everyone, what is your #1 takeaway from all this brilliance Amanda dropped on us today? If you could put it in the chat, would love to see what is the #1 thing you are taking away from this session. Center the story of the user experience. Reframe my story to why you should be knitting to why I love to knit. Ah, love that.
Oh, that's great.
I'm taking away stories are your mission and action. Like it's one of, I call it a duh. Like once I hear it, it sounds so obvious, but I hadn't thought of it that way. And that's so helpful and powerful. Michelle says to reframe the way I think about my work, what I do, and how to lean in with authenticity. Megan, I should have a plan for my story instead of improving it.
Improvising, maybe?
Improvising it. Yeah. I was like, huh, yes, improvising. Yes.
I love a great improv, but I think it helps to have the seeds in there.
When you can do both, right? Have your back pocket story, and then if something else bubbles up in the moment, you're allowed. And Brittany, it's okay to use tried and true structures. The specific details are the special sauce. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining this session live. Thank you to everyone who made the time to catch the replay. And a huge thank you to Amanda for putting this together, bringing your wisdom and your expertise to share with all of us.
Thank you all. It's great to see you. Thanks, Olivia.
Take good care.